So again, I wanted to just introduce our speaker and provide the prompt. So this is Danielle Hoots, and Danielle was provided with a pretty broad prompt to choose a sexual health topic and address the following components: factors that impact sexual health, her foundational approach to this work, and how this approach would improve the sexual health and well-being of SU students. So we'll have 30 minutes for presentation and about 15 minutes for Q&A. Okay.
I was going to say, is there a time?
Yeah.
A time.
Right there.
I can watch myself. Okay. So, and you pronounced my last name correctly.
Did I?
That's
Okay.
awesome. Most people do not. So, let's jump right in here. I don't really need to introduce myself. You have my resume, and she introduced my name. So, I wanted to make sure that we're all sort of on the same page before I go any further about what sexual health actually is. A lot of times sexual health gets focused on a lot of risk reduction things. So reducing STI rates, reducing unintended pregnancy, which are good things, but it is not the full extent of what being sexually healthy means. A lot of these other things that contribute to sexual health go beyond just behaviors or actions. It's about their ability to access different services, about their ability to communicate with a partner, communicate even with a medical professional about what's going on with their body. If someone did have a sexual health concern that might need medical intervention. And so when we look at sexual health in this way, it becomes a lot more robust than what I think typically people assume. You're good on a condom, that's it. Use contraception, that's it. This is really something that needs to be inclusive, comprehensive, and recognize that all humans have some spectrum, or fall somewhere on the spectrum of sexuality. So a little bit of foundational knowledge, and I don't always think that statistics are super helpful in getting the message across, but I think some of these are important sort of to understand the foundation of where we're at now and where we might want to be going. So young adults are at greater risk for contracting STIs. That's shown in all of the data. So when you see a statistic like 1 in 2 sexually active people will have an STI by age 25, I think a lot of people have some visceral reaction to that, and like, oh, is that true? But it is. Most of these transmissions, the 20 million new transmissions occur every year, right? Most of those are in that young adult population. Untreated things that STIs can lead to are pelvic inflammatory disease for women. That untreated STIs can actually lead to infertility. And it costs a lot of money, right? To have untreated STIs in the population, it actually costs us a lot of money. So once it is figured out that someone has an STI, they have to receive antibiotics, so they might be resistant to the antibiotics, and there's medical funds and that sort of thing that come into play here too. And so if you haven't figured out, I'm going to focus on STI prevention for my sexual health topic. So, to talk about STI prevention, I think first I have to talk about some of the risk factors. A lot of times the risk factors get, I think, seen as just individual shortcomings. Like, oh, they don't use condoms, they don't use contraception. When in actuality, a lot of risk factors will connect back into environments in our community, our social interactions with others and connections there. So risk factors can be anything from not being able to communicate with a partner about wanting to use a barrier method, right? About not feeling the ability to advocate for oneself when it comes to sex, when it comes to what types of sex they would like to be having or not, and what barriers they would like to be using, or contraception they'd like to be using. Things that can also play a role, sexual activity under the influence. So we know that when not just students, but anyone is under the influence, they are less likely to use barrier methods like an internal condom or an external condom. They're less likely to use those effectively. And so even when they are using barriers, it's maybe not in a way that is actually providing the protection they think they're getting. So there's some stigma and cultural discomfort about talking about sex, right? It can put some people's hackles up a little bit, and that means that students aren't actually able to engage in open and honest dialogue about that with anyone, and even with me. Like, so I've had in my role as sexual health educator in South Carolina, I had students come and talk to me, and it was really some of the first time that they were processing some of their thoughts about sex, about how to use barrier methods, about sometimes their sexuality and identity there. And so unless we sort of create a space for people to be able to openly communicate and have those conversations, it really can be a negative impact on STI rates, or on STI prevention. Most STIs don't have any symptoms. That's another big thing, right? And so a lot of times you might see people like put up a picture of, this is what infected genitalia looks like with chlamydia. Cool. What's that doing? How's that helping anyone? Most STIs don't have those symptoms, and so if you're trying to get a student to get tested, that's not a very effective way of communicating the importance of testing. When I got to South Carolina, they literally had pictures of that in their presentations, and I was like, this is not going to work, y'all. It's really not. And I'm not going to go through every single one of these things with you, and you can read. The high-risk social sexual networks thing, I want to clarify that. That doesn't probably mean what most people would think. So because of structural issues, there are populations that are at greater risk for STI transmission. That's because, not because there's anything inherently wrong with those folks as humans, or anything like that. It means that they have less access to healthcare. It means they have less access to testing, less access to barrier method use, not knowing how to use them effectively. And so you see higher STI transmission rates in marginalized populations. Within those populations, folks are having sex, right? So a social sexual network within a marginalized community is going to look different than one in a very affluent community, right? And so I'm not saying like, people of color are just gonna have higher rates of STIs, like that would be the stupidest statement ever. That's not at all true. But because of social and structural issues that exist in communities, right, already, it means that there is higher risk for folks in that community having sex with each other than transmitting to others, right? So I just want to clarify that. I'm not trying to demonize any particular population. So all of these risk factors are things that someone would have to consider doing any sort of STI prevention outreach. I mentioned, I think most of you were in just one of you maybe wasn't in the interview earlier, but I mentioned the social determinants of health. So this is the definition from Healthy People. Social determinants of health are conditions in the environments in which people are born, live, learn, work, play, worship, and age that affect a wide range of health, functioning, and quality of life outcomes and risks. This is where I'm starting to get into my foundational approach, right? So what we often do is focus on the individual. The individual needs to change. They need to change their behavior. They need to change how they're communicating. They need to do better, right? There are inherent things that lead certain populations to be able to engage in those behaviors more than others. And this is sort of connected to my approach with college health, right? So if you're familiar with NASPA, right, you probably are. So NASPA also, they don't say social determinants of health here, but this is, I think, what they're getting at with this quote from their Leadership for a Healthy Campus. To successfully address the health of today's college students, the focus must move beyond individuals and their behaviors to establishing a healthy campus community. Campus health concerns need integration throughout the institution's various systems. Strong leadership and deliberate action by student affairs professionals is required to achieve this goal. So again, they didn't say social determinants of health, but they're talking about systems. They're not talking about the individual. And I think, right, like, if you're not familiar with Healthy People, it's one of the, if you're in public health, you are, but maybe not so much for student affairs professionals. The Healthy People initiative, they set health goals and targets for the nation as a whole. It also goes in to inform Healthy Campus, which sets goals and targets for our college campuses across the nation. So this is their like broader, like nationwide group, and then Healthy Campus is more student-centered. So all of these things are very interconnected. My personal approach to sexual health is these things that are on board. I don't think you can do sexual health without sort of having a feedback loop. I don't think you can do really any sort of health improvement or addressing any health issue on campus unless you have a feedback loop. So evidence-based, right? I need to know, is what I'm doing actually working? Is it meeting the goals and objectives that I've set for myself? Is it meeting the goals and objectives of my department, my division, my campus as a whole? Is it inclusive and intersectional? So if I'm doing a presentation on STI prevention and I'm only talking about heterosexual sex, I am leaving out a whole huge population, right? If I'm talking about LGBT issues and I am only talking about, we're using examples with white people, that's not effective either, because we know that people have multiple aspects to their identities. There are people that are persons of color, that are sexual and gender minorities, that are, all these intersecting identities. So I try to be conscious when I am planning and putting together presentations to keep that in mind, to remember my audience, and to center inclusivity. Comprehensive, that to me means more than just talking about, so I'm saying I'm talking about STI prevention, right? But really it's more than just saying, hey, get tested for STIs and use condoms. Comprehensive means working on those communication skills, to talk about everything from healthy relationships, what that looks like, to actually, how to use a condom, to how to talk to your doctor about getting a pap smear, or all of those things are really interconnected, right? Collaborative, this isn't work that can be done in a silo. A lot of times universities kind of get siloed in different departments. I've seen that time and time again. But in order for sexual health approaches to work on a campus, we have to tear down those silos. We have to, build the partnerships that we can have folks on one side of campus in the housing office be on the same page with me, here doing on-the-ground sexual health education with this person over here in a cultural center supporting students of color. Like all of these things are super important to connect. And that kind of focuses on the inter and multidisciplinary. My background is in public health, right? I don't have student affairs, masters, anything like that. I rely on my colleagues in student affairs that have that knowledge of development models and identity development and that sort of thing to help me as I'm doing my work, right? Not that I rely on them to do my work for me or anything like that. Not to put anything else on anyone's plate, but to bounce ideas off of. And am I looking at this correctly? Because, like I said, silos, that can happen when I don't allow myself to bounce ideas off of colleagues. I can become siloed within myself in this public health approach, right? So it's really important that I have that different perspective. I know you have like a dietitian background, right? So things like that can be really important too. Even like you might not see like a direct connection, but there is a reason that we need to collaborate and connect on things. So. Skill and development focus. This is really sort of in contrast to a risk and shame approach that I've seen historically through sexual health education. Risk and shame are really not effective in reducing STI rates or really creating any behavior change at all across the board. I don't remember if I said this before the presentation. I think I said before the presentation started. Like having pictures. No, I said that during the presentation. Having pictures of. I'm a little informal too, you guys. Okay. Having pictures of genitals infected with chlamydia doesn't do anything. It does nothing. It tells them nothing. Like, what do I do instead? I don't know. Don't get this. Okay, cool. How do I do that? And that's not just, here's how to put on a condom. That's not what I mean by skills, even though I am talking about STI prevention. Yes, how to put on a condom, very important. But how do you talk to your partner about wanting to use a condom? How do you talk to them about what kind of condoms to use? Do you have a latex allergy? Like, would you rather use an internal condom than an external condom? Hey, would you like to use dental dams for oral sex? Like, all of these things that people don't talk about because they don't have that foundational skill and they've not been developed in that way to have those conversations. So a lot of times people think that sexual health is really like me just throwing condoms at people or putting a condom on a penis model, and it is sometimes. But really, this fits into student affairs, right? You're talking about student affairs professionals are here to help students develop and become healthy, whole humans that go out into the world and do great things. This is part of that. So kind of connecting back to the social determinants of health, does this have a pointer on it?
The red button at the top.
Yeah. Oh, cool. The ecological model, is a staple of public health. It looks a little bit different depending on the source. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention uses the socio-ecological model. This one in particular is from the American College Health Association. And so, like I said, everyone is going to have sort of a different approach to this general idea. But this is the model that I'm using for today. So we have things at the interpersonal level, which includes knowledge, attitudes, behavior. This is a little hard to read here. Knowledge, attitudes, behavior, self-concept, skill, developmental history, then interpersonal processes and primary groups. That includes formal and informal social network and social support systems like family, work group, friendship networks. Okay? Then we have institutional factors, social institutions and organization characteristics. They may be formal or informal, and then also things like regulations for operations. Community factors, relations among organization and institution and formal networks with defined boundaries, and then policy, which you heard me talk about. Like, one of the reasons I'm really excited about this position is because of where Oregon is at with policy right now as it relates to sexual health. So this isn't like a, okay, we do something here, we've done that, we do something here, okay, we check that off, we've done something here. It's not like that. This is a model, right? It says in the title. It's a model, it's not a step-by-step approach. So I'm gonna kind of walk you through what I think my objective would be at each of these levels. Because in this position, in the sexual health coordinator position, obviously the person in this role is not going to be advocating for public policy, right? That's not the job. But there may be some ways that we look at how policy is enacted, how we partner with other folks in the state, and those sorts of things. So I'm just going to kind of walk you through my objectives at each of these levels. So at the interpersonal, that first smaller bubble, I believe my objective in this level would be to reach the student. So delivering direct, inclusive programming, increasing their knowledge and skills, right? And that seems pretty self-explanatory from the model. So some of the questions I'm going to ask myself are going to be about me. What am I doing? How am I reaching students? How am I centering diversity? How am I working with students from different backgrounds than my own? So aside from those questions that I'm asking myself, I'm also asking questions about the students themselves. What skills do they have to access healthcare and sexual health services? What do they think sexual health is? What's their understanding of it? Is what I'm thinking about implementing developmentally appropriate for the population, right? So sometimes I think we talk down to students a little bit and don't give them enough credit for understanding things that are challenging topics. So particularly for sexual health, I think we kind of sometimes approach students as if they're still in high school or still in middle school when we're talking about these things. And it really does a disservice to them and doesn't connect with them very well on the issue. They know. And then also asking what stigma does the population face? And that might be the population as a whole. Okay, talking about sexual health is difficult, or it might be within this population, the students of color really struggle with having conversations about condoms use or whatever that thing is. So some of these things, like, I don't have all the answers to these questions that I'm putting up here. These are questions that I think are important to know before anyone can do this work, or they're questions to continue asking while the work is being done. The next level, interpersonal. This is really focused on partnerships. So identifying and building partnerships, ones that are existing, building them up more, finding partners that have maybe historically not been brought in or bought in. And so for this campus, I don't have a ton of questions on this one, but because I think I was able to kind of suss out some of the potential partnerships. Now, I think that in conversation with folks from all these different areas, I could identify other partners that haven't been thought of before, but this would be sort of my starting point. I think, let's see, yeah, everything from faculty to folks within student health here, to more student affairs things like the cultural resource centers, student organizations that exist. I'm not sure where housing is under this campus, if it's part of student affairs. Okay. So a lot of those potential partnerships I was able to kind of find from my research online, I think. But I'm sure I'm missing some potential awesome opportunities. So conversations with colleagues can help identify those further. At the institutional level, my objective would be to identify characteristics within the institution itself. So, and this is where it gets a little, like, between institution and community, and sometimes with policy, the borders and boundaries are not always super easy to find. And so this is just my perception of what falls under institutional. If you asked another public health professional to do the same presentation, it might look a little different. They may classify things differently. So for me, identifying characteristics within the institution that might impact sexual health involves asking questions like, what are the policies? What are our strategic planning goals on the campus? How do those fit into encouraging positive sexual health behavior? What do they do to discourage it? How are the issues of alcohol and drug prevention and violence prevention and sexual health merged together, overlapping, partnered, because there are a lot of issues with violence prevention, alcohol and drug use, and sexual health that all come together. They're all related. Is there a financial commitment? I think just from my research on the institution, it seems like there is a decent financial commitment in terms of like the safer sex spots and funding things like that. Offering a few free testing events throughout the year. Those are things that show that financial commitment to sexual health. How does the institution overall actively work to support marginalized students? So I'm not even talking about sexual health. I'm just talking about health disparities and things that marginalized students would experience on this campus, because even if you don't see a direct correlation, right, there is one, I'm promising you. If a student is not feeling supported and encouraged and like they're able to be their best self on campus, it is going to have an impact on their sexual health. If they're feeling like they're not connected and they're not making friendships and having a really hard time fitting in, it's going to impact their sexual health. They may, I don't always know how that's going to be, right, because I can't predict behavior, but they may engage in unhealthy behaviors related to sex because they feel a disconnect from the campus community. And they may engage in other unhealthy behaviors like alcohol and drug use, those sort of things. And so if we're not able to actively address those disparities, if the institution is not sort of bought in to support those students, it will have an impact on sexual health, however indirectly. So how is sexual health programming integrated throughout the institution? Is it, sexual health is something that student health services does and that's it? Or is it sexual health is something that student health services leads and we have all these other partners? Or, you know, they're the guiding force, right? And then communicating messages, right? So how we communicate messages to students and then how we communicate messages to other professional staff on campus about sexual health, right? If we're telling others through, maybe not even through our actual words, but through our actions, that sexual health is not an okay topic to discuss, it will have an impact. Whether we're telling that to other professional staff or whether we're telling that to students, it does get absorbed by the community and will shift how we're able to discuss the topic. Okay, so at the community level, my objective here would be to facilitate collaboration. And I know we kind of talked about the partnerships and stuff earlier on, This I see more as on campus, but also with off-campus partners that can help sort of support and enhance programming related to sexual health. I know that there are both formal and informal relationships or coalitions that exist, and there is a coalition here already, the Prevention and Advocacy Coalition, what is? Okay. So that already exists, right? How can that be enhanced? How can we bring new voices to the table? How can we highlight perspectives that haven't been considered yet? How can we sort of improve that? Again, messages for the community. So this is a little bit different than messages for to our students and to our other professionals on campus, but to the city, right? To our surrounding community. Is Oregon State seen as a place where students can access sexual health services in a confidential, safe environment? Is it seen as a place that encourages students to be sexually healthy? What is the view of the campus to the community and to our community partners, right? So outside STI testing agencies or the domestic violence, sexual violence shelters, how do they see us? And then environmental factors. So this can be things like just accessing condoms, right? And I see here you have condoms like available for distribution on the walls in those little dispensers. The safer sex spots thing, this is one thing that gets at the environmental aspect, right? But there's other things, right? So y'all are doing great there in the safer sex spots and handing out condoms and stuff, but what are other environmental factors? So when we look at the student health center, like the building itself, when a student comes in to get tested for STI, what is the process that they do, how they have to walk through? And is there a way to maybe reduce any perceived stigma, right? Even if there isn't stigma, you know, like judgment or something coming in from the folks in the waiting room or things like that. How can we ensure the student that that this is okay, that they're not they haven't done anything wrong, that they're doing something that they should be doing, and this is great. I don't know what those things are. I'm not trying to call you out and saying you're not doing this or anything like that. But these are questions that I think are really important to continue to ask. Okay, and then at the last level, so this is the level that I probably personally don't have as much input in, because it's like, you know, it comes from higher up than I have been at in like a program coordinator level. But it is important to understand where the policy is at, where the laws are at, what the funding is, and just sort of a temperature take of the situation from a policy level. So that could be local, state, or federal. So what policies encourage or work against positive sexual health behaviors? I think at the national level, there are a whole lot of policies that work against it. I think at the state level here, like I said, I'm really excited for the K through 12 related policy, because I think even though you're having students come from out of state and from international places, it still sets a framework for how sexual health is discussed in the state of Oregon. And I think that within 5 years' time, I think if you compared like where I came from in South Carolina to Oregon, I think you're going to see a big shift because of that policy being in place, even though it's K through 12, right? It shows an investment, it shows a commitment, and that will trickle up. Yeah, not trickle down. That doesn't work. And then what policies, I skipped one. The funding for comprehensive medically accurate sexual health education. So how are we funding the C-Care thing, right? That's state funded, right? So there's one thing, right? Doing good there. On a federal level, not so great. Let's see.
I want to make sure we have time for questions too.
Okay, yeah, I'm almost done.
Yeah, no. you're fine.
Social determinants of health. Okay. So this is my last slide for my references. That's the word. The ecological model I talked about, right? So this is sort of the ecological model in action. And this is why I think that my approach is effective in impacting the sexual health of students, because it's this feedback loop, right? So all of those things we went through already. Okay, so we're tracking things, we're assessing things, we're monitoring things, we're implementing and planning and reassessing and mobilizing our community, and then we do it again, right? This is not like a one-time thing. These questions that I've posed, they're not one-time asks. This is a continual improvement thing. I don't know if anyone's familiar with like quality improvement. That's maybe more of a student health services focus thing. But we have to see where our gaps are, do something programmatically to improve those, assess it, do it again, and just repeat. Because without that feedback, we don't know really. We think we're doing a good job, and we have fuzzy, warm, good feelings about it, but I'd like to see actual change.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I'm more than happy to send this along if anyone wants this presentation.
Yeah, I'll do my.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks for answering that. Do folks have questions?
I have a question. So I absolutely agree with you that we don't give students enough credit. I think particularly when it comes to the field of prevention and wellness as a whole, and in a lot of different ways. But yes, so we have this, I think we have it, we're sometimes in an interesting space where we don't give students enough credit. Sexual health is really, really hard to talk about, even if students have really high knowledge of sexual health, because there's such a barrier, and it can be uncomfortable, and we have some students that have very low knowledge of sexual health. I'm thinking of a presentation I observed last night. It was a sexual health presentation, and the students were incredibly rowdy, and I think part of that is I feel uncomfortable because we're talking about sex, we're talking about wellness, we're talking about how to communicate sexual needs and consent, and it felt like a little bit of chaos in the room. So I think my question is, so where do we find balance, or how would you approach finding balance in, we need to give students more credit, students are uncomfortable, students don't always react to hearing this information well in a presentation.
Right.
That's a huge mess of things. Where is there balance?
That's a really good question. I've been in the room with the rowdy students, and just like in that moment, like my first presentation out of grad school, like in South Carolina, I'm like, okay, let's do this. Yeah, I think maybe we need to look at our modes of delivery and see if maybe there's something more technological based, like electronically based, that we can use to connect with students and engage them on these things in maybe a more comfortable setting. I don't know exactly what that looks like, but I've been sort of mulling this over for a little while, actually. Because I think that just like we have, the Title IX trainings that students have to go through, and on our campus it's electronic sort of click through, you learn this information. I think it would be really helpful to have something like that related to sexual health, related to communication and healthy relationships. I know some of the Title IX training things will tie that in as well. But I think, like, obviously students are gravitating more and more toward technology, and like it's just ubiquitous, right? I think it would be an opportunity missed not to explore that a little bit more. Maybe it's something that exists already. Maybe we go out and look for because I know there are sexual health apps that exist. Maybe we just, like advertise existing sexual health apps that are out there, people can get answers from that. Maybe we have something specific to the campus that highlights all the resources that, that are here, and comprehensively, not just like, here's where you go get STI testing, but here, if you're having trouble with alcohol and drugs, here's where you go. Because again, those things tie in, and we see poor health behaviors associated with some of the alcohol consumption and drug consumption. So I don't have like a solid answer for you. I've definitely been the facilitator in the room with rowdy folks. And it can be really hard to have sort of a classroom management in that moment. I think depending on the audience, I'm comfortable telling them to shut up. Like in so many words. Obviously, you gotta read the room, but sometimes just being like, hey, like, y'all, bring it back in. And I'm a relatively quiet person, but I can be loud when I need to.
Sure.
And I will call people out. So I think, like, obviously we have presentations that are gonna still take place, right? There's education in person that's still gonna take place. And so we have to find some way to still negotiate and navigate through that. But I do think that there are other missed opportunities with technology that we have.
I know we're almost at time. Any other?
I just talked y'all's ear off.
Okay. If you have feedback forms that you want to leave here, I can gather those. Otherwise, I can get them from you. You come again to our neighborhood.
Nice to meet all of you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'm excited for the lunch portion.
Yeah, we're gonna have some food.
Can I just touch base with you?
Yes.
One more time?
If you can.
What
Get
office
Marty.
are you?
Fraternity sorority life.
Okay, awesome,
So-
awesome.
Big partner.
So how many organizations are there?
So we have 48, and our community is about 3,200 students. And we're losing a staff member as of Friday.
Ah,